Insights, solutions, and networking all come together at RSA Conference. Join a global cybersecurity community at rsaconference.com/ITSPmag24.
Well, hello everybody, this is Ciappelli. Welcome to another episode of Audio Signals. Even if this time we will talk about technology, about cybersecurity, about artificial intelligence, and a lot of other fun stuff. The goal is actually to introduce a new podcast on ITSPmagazine with my good friend Christina Stokes, which is right here. If you're watching the video, you can see her. And if you're listening, I'm not lying to you. Here she is, Christina. Say hello, goodbye. You'll do that at the end. Let's start with hello.
Hello, how are you? Thanks for having me on your show.
It's been a project in the making for a while. I remember we were talking about this adventure exactly a year ago.
At
RSA conference last year, and I was really excited about your idea. And sometimes good things take time, and we're finally launched the show. It's your show, and that's what we're going to be talking about here today, where we talk about the stories that you will tell. And also we'll talk about the storyteller, which is you, mostly why you decided to use the podcast platform to share certain story. What is your why? And I think that's really the most important thing in the end. Why do we do what we do? And then the how and the what come after. So
absolutely.
Let's start with the beginning of the story, which is you. A little introduction about yourself for our audience.
Well, I'm Christina Stokes. I work in cybersecurity. I decided to switch into cyber a few years ago after working in other industries where I had roles that overlapped with tech. Prior to that, before I was living in the U.S., I worked on military bases overseas, NATO bases. I grew up in the Philippines, Japan, and Italy, and moved to the U.S. After college as an adult. And eventually my roles became more and more technical over time. And I became interested in the safety aspect of cybersecurity and keeping data safe, keeping people safe with the proliferance of social media and the information that, people were sharing that we could find. There were some dangers to that. And that really drew me into cyber. And I decided to start a business to help business owners and entrepreneurs keep their businesses safe, because that, of course, impacted their families, especially when you're one-person business and just starting out. And I decided to go back to college to graduate school, and I earned a dual degree in cybersecurity and MBA. And here I am a few years later. So it's been an interesting journey. It hasn't been a straightforward journey, but I've enjoyed every step of the way.
You know how bored we'll be if it was a straightforward journey? It's like if journey, if it's just all the way straight until the sun sets or the sunrise, it's going to be a little boring. So adventure is what makes us who we are, and what made you. It sounds to me you were already driven into security in a way by being in the military, obviously, and then you decided to bring that into the civil life.
Yes.
So that's really cool.
I was out there as a dependent, and we got so much information about operation security. And I was also living and working out there during a time where, that digital revolution was starting to take place. And so this was prior to social media and just when we started having websites and things like that. So a lot of the work that I did was helping transition from paper to digital. And I worked for a journalist at the time on a military base in NATO. And that was a really interesting experience. And, what we were allowed to post and share and write about, and what we couldn't, for obvious reasons, military strategic reasons.
You just told me something that I didn't know. So I didn't know that your role of journalism, which is very very interesting, and I'm connecting the dots here. Into
Yeah.
You wanted now to do the same job, telling stories and sharing news, and I think you're very, very driven by this idea, as you mentioned, to keep people safe. And
Yes.
Tell me about that. So, is it something you always had in your life, even before joining the military, and that's why you did that? Or
I want to clarify, I wasn't in the military. I was a dependent.
Okay. Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was a civilian when I was working out there, but I had a family member who worked for the government. They were a veteran. They worked for the government, and that took them through their whole career.
Okay.
And so the great thing for me was that we got to live in the Philippines when the base was open there, and I was able to be with my family for so long. I, was able to grow up in other countries too, like Japan and Italy, and experience a lot of different things, like living through a volcanic eruption in the Philippines. Mount Pinatubo erupted, and that was wild. So we were, evacuated. The dependents were evacuated, and we had to leave. And then, like in Italy, experiencing going into ThreatCon Delta during 9/11 when that happened and I lived off base at the time, so I remember being trapped on the base because I was in school at the time, and there was they weren't letting people off if all you had were civilian, like clothes that could identify you as an American. And all I had on me that day was a cheerleading uniform and my JROTC uniform. So I could not
talking about
base.
Not being able to be identified, right?
Right. So I'm either in a Navy uniform or cheerleading gear, and I was stuck on the base for a little bit, but wow. All of it was an interesting experience. And then even after that, going to school with on school buses with Navy security protecting you, fully armed, that was an experience too. So safety has always been a consideration for me. And if you talk to other military dependents and veterans, you'll hear about the one military channel that we have, which has changed. I'm sure there are more channels now, but we had AFN, the American Forces Network, and a lot of our commercials were about operation security. So, that just kind of got driven into me and carried into the work that I did throughout my career. And I would always look at things and kind of question, well, is that safe? And even when social media came about, and I'm glad I was older when that started, because I couldn't imagine being, a teenager or something dealing with social media. It was always, well, what can you post that keeps you safe so that your house doesn't get robbed, or stuff like that. It was always a question in the back of my mind, and that really drove me into the security aspect of tech.
It's an interesting story. I mean, I can definitely see myself, and I have the same thinking that you do. I am a big fan of radio. I still like to fall asleep at night with a little FM transistor radio, even if all day I'm on computer and smartphones and all of that. But just the idea of literally rolling and tuning into hearing the static. So I always love communication, and that's why my background is in sociology of communication. And I wonder that. I mean, and that's what drove me into with Sean in cybersecurity, and say there is a lot that can be done to educate the everyday people, the small business, the medium-sized business, but also the people that work in corporation. As we know, corporate can do a lot for you, but once you leave the network, then you find yourself somewhere else. So, and I thought about that. I'm like, how different would have been my teenager life if we had all of this? I think my first mobile phone was probably when I was in my 20s. So that's how old I am. Hello, it's me. But yeah, it's kind of scary. to go back to your point, like I'm glad that I got to experience that the analog to digital transformation, and of course it's still both analog and digital.
Yes, and I love analog. Still,
I love both. I like to appreciate the digital because I also like to put a vinyl. And and hear the scratch instead of just pushing a button and everything is clean and right.
Yeah, and even with books, sometimes I prefer the physical book. But I was telling a friend recently, like I feel like the font keeps getting smaller, and at least on my Kindle, I can enlarge it. But I need those reading glasses, so it's terrible. I'm like, I need a magnifier.
Yeah, well, and that's life. But also, I think maybe a reason for why it's getting worse too is because we're always staring at the phone all day long, and we have the lights in our face and so on. Listen, before we start talking about your podcast, I want to touch on your multicultural experience growing up, and I mean, me being Italian, obviously living in the U.S. and been traveling, I always say, it just learning about different culture, it just open your mind. You see things in a different way. So I'm curious, especially because I've been in Japan, didn't live there, although it's one of my dreams, and loving that culture, but also so different from the Western culture or the Mediterranean culture. You also lived in Italy, so we can talk about that, and the Philippines. How do you see that making you who you are now because you experience all of that?
I mean, I think it's made me very open to different ideas, and it's made me very flexible and also just extremely curious. That curiosity has never ever gone away, and I'm what you call a forever learner. So but yeah, I'm Filipino, so growing up in the Philippines was just amazing because I had family there, and my grandma who I was really close to, and that was just that really felt like home to me. So leaving the Philippines after the military base closed was very difficult. But we went to Japan. We lived in Okinawa, which is smaller island south, and it was beautiful. And I remember we would go camping on beaches, and that island was just gorgeous. And I had a wonderful time there. I was able to learn a little bit of Japanese, which I did not carry forward, unfortunately. But it was an incredible experience. And then after that, we ended up in Italy, where I lived for 10 years in Sicily. So, I got to travel all through Europe and travel all up and down Italy. And, I think at one point my friends and I, we were in Rome for a school trip, and we were doing our homework at the Spanish Steps. And, a couple of my friends were like, oh, God, this is so boring, because it was like the 17th time we've done it. But I'm like, when are we going to be able to do this ever again? So I definitely learned to appreciate the experience. And, what I do miss is that I didn't take enough photos while we were there. And it's so great because now we have smartphones on our cell phones and everything. And had we had that, I mean, that would have been wonderful. But, back then it was film cameras and, the early digital cameras with 2 megapixels that had terrible photos. But it was, all of it was great.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. I have the same regret. Like, there's a phase of my life that I do have memories, but not many pictures. But now I have probably way too many pictures, and maybe. So, funny story. Yesterday, which is now yesterday when you listen to this, because maybe it was a week ago. Everything is relative. There was the eclipse, and it made me think about. I'm not gonna get. I wasn't in the full path, but close by. And I said, I'm not going to get the glasses. I'm not going to go and get the camera with a filter and all of that. I just want to sit outside or take a walk and experience it myself, the surrounding. Because now you go to a concert and you're just like always with your hands on the, I mean, you're watching it through the lens of the camera, and you kind of miss that sitting on the Spanish Steps.
It's like it's a layer.
And just enjoy it and live it instead of say, let me take this picture so that I can share with everybody else what I'm doing, but you're taking it away from yourself. So something
like we've got the memories and the experience, and it's not like we weren't doing it for the likes, right? So it's different.
Really nice. We were not doing it for the likes and the share and the retweet and all of that. Oh my God, that's funny. Which kind of bring us into sharing, maybe a little bit too much, as you mentioned, and all the many other things that cybersecurity affect our life. And most of the people that are not in the industry, they don't really think about that. And I think that's why it's such a hard job to share with them. So on Cyber and AI, it's the name of the show, of the podcast.
Yes.
Why?
So I wanted to talk about cybersecurity. I wanted to talk about AI and other emerging technologies as well, not just AI. And everyone, of course, right now is hyper-focused on AI. And then next time it's going to be like quantum stuff and, as it all moves forward. But yes, and robotics. I want one of the dogs. If I could just, have one of those at home. But I wanted to talk about cybersecurity and AI because I get a lot of questions about it. And I want to talk to people who know the answers. I want to help others share what they're dealing with day to day and talk about how AI and other emerging tech is going to impact cybersecurity in all aspects, not just for us and what we do as professionals, but how it affects the tools that we use and what it means for our industry going forward. Also including regulations, frameworks, laws, policies, just GRC. I'm very interested in all of those areas and how all of those areas interact and connect globally. It's not, for me, like the interest isn't just domestically as far as the states goes, but globally, because we see legislation in the EU affect what we do here in the States, like GDPR and things like that. And with, emerging tech changing not only how we work and how we live, but how our laws and governments operate. I think all of that is extremely fascinating. And it's happening like right now. We're in this seat, and I feel like it's one of those moments that are going to change. Like it's like a chapter, like, for example, like before we had internet and then after we had internet, right? So now it's like before AI and after AI, and things like that. So I think it's an interesting time, and it's an interesting space to be working in at this time. And I also want to provide information to those who are interested in coming into our industry and let them know from different people in different seats what those roles are like and what they can do to facilitate having a career in this if they're interested. And it doesn't have to be in a technical role. Like, not all of the roles are technical. They're adjacent positions. So whatever your interests are, you can find it in this industry for sure.
Yep, it's definitely an interesting time. And I was listening, I think I was flipping through Instagram. There's a short story that Instagram knows exactly what I like.
Yeah.
On point, really. But one was a philosopher and a historian. He was talking about how back in the days, in the Middle Age, but even in the 1800s, 1700, if you had to tell your kids or someone, a young person, would say, well, what are the things that you need to learn to have a future? Okay, well, learn how to use a bow and a arrow and how to ride a horse and how to do certain things. And you can be sure in 20 years it would not change, right? Mm-hmm. Now, this philosopher was questioning, we don't know what skills is going to be required in 10 years from now.
Yeah.
We literally do not know where it's going. And
Right.
I find it exciting, but also a little scary. So
It is.
I appreciate you and people like you and, even what I do on my other show to kind of like talk to people about what the possibility are. And so my question for you is this going to be a show where your target audience is people that are experts that work in the field, or you're trying to make it understandable 101 cybersecurity, 101 AI? Who is your target audience, at least in your mind? Then we'll see who listens.
I think it'll be a range, of course, depending on the guest and the topic. But I'd like it to be, within reach for a number of people, regardless of, where you are in your journey when it comes to tech, whether you're a beginner or you're a seasoned expert. And I think with all of the changes that are happening now and with everything going on with tech, a lot of us who are seasoned and experienced feel like beginners at times. So, it's like we can go back and talk about MS-DOS 5.5, but, that now we're talking about ML and LLM and AI, and everyone's like, well, what is all this? Like, how do I do, prompts and things like that? But you're right. It is, what do we tell people as far as how do you prepare? Like I have a couple of kids, and one of them's like, well, in the future, isn't AI just going to calculate everything for us? So trigonometry, what's the point? and that is scary to me, because there is what happens if the technology ever fails and nobody knows how to do it by hand or, manually, or just how we did things when it was all more dependent on analog. Mm-hmm. So, as fascinating and interesting as it is, I am still one of those people, even though I work in the industry, that are a little skeptical. It's not at a point yet, I don't think, where, any of us are comfortable trusting it 100%, because it is a technology itself that is still learning and still needing to be trained. And maybe if people are interested in careers, it's getting into that aspect of the data, training it, because there's so many different ways it can be trained. And these types of tools don't have, like I was saying on one of my other episodes, the contextual knowledge that humans have. They can't express or feel emotion. Mm-hmm. Or just other things that are within societal context, because it doesn't know it the way humans know it. So I don't think it can replace us in that sense,
Well, storytelling for sure. I have a couple of episodes, one with Alex Schwartzman. He's a sci-fi writer, and he did a collection of stories where other writer participated, but the theme was to portray the future or present with AI in a sci-fi kind of way, and it was very interesting. We were talking about exactly this thing, how do we not only interact with AI, but what can we do with it? And the point was, it's good at summarizing, it's good at doing certain things, but the lack of experience instead of parroting and mimicking what we done as human, you can't write a poetry about love unless you experience love or lost love, or that experience factor. It's what makes us human, I think, most than anything else. So, well, I hope you're going to have many of this conversation too, but I know you're going to get sometimes much more technical due to your background as well. So a vision of the kind of guest you're going to bring on the show, and you can start with the first episode, which, hello, it's already live. So when you're done listening to this, please jump on Cyber and I, because it's with a really good friend She's been doing show with me and Sean. We had a weekly a few years ago, and that's how we met. So, who was your guest, and who you envision to be our future guest?
So my first guest was Diana Kelly, and you're right, that show is live, so check it out. And I absolutely wanted her to be my first guest because, of course, she was the one, she introduced me to you guys at RSA. But also, after I had completed my dual degree program, and I met Diana through mutual people, one of my first podcasts that I was on as a guest was Diana's podcast. It was an ITSP magazine podcast with her and Limor Kessam. And so, of course, when we started talking about this, I absolutely wanted to have her come on. But she is such an inspiration to me. Just her entire career and what she has worked on and what she's working on now. And not just that, but she's very supportive of other people in technology and women in tech as well. And I wanted people to, meet her. Of course, there's so many people that know who Diana is, but she's just so inspirational and such a great person to be around. And so other people that I'd love to have come on my show would be working in similar areas of tech, from all across the board, as far as, what they're doing, whether they're practitioners or executives. I'm also interested in every once in a while having guests come on who are not working directly in tech, but who are impacted by the, technology that we work on. So whether it's they're impacted by cybersecurity or they're impacted by AI, I'd like to have those folks come on board so that we can more for us in the industry to get a perspective on what it's like for others outside of it and how they're being impacted, because that might be able to inform what we're doing, how we're rolling things out, how we write policies, and things like that.
Really cool. And talking about another connection, Dr. Joseph that you introduced to me, he's going to be on this show after this. I don't know in how many more episodes, but we're scheduled. And in our introductory call, that was exactly what he was telling me. Like, they have this podcast. It's not on ITSP Magazine, but he was telling me that it happened to have a friend that it's absolutely not in the industry. Is actually, I think, in a sport journalist, if I remember well. And he said it was very refreshing to talk about technology with people that are not in technology, but then realize how technology actually is everywhere. And if there is technology, there is cybersecurity, or we are in trouble if there is.
Yes. I've had that conversation with Dr. Joseph as well. We're actually going to do a little, he's coming on to my podcast. I'm going to go on his. He's wonderful. He's awesome. And we like to message each other and razz each other on sports teams and things like that. So
very cool. Very cool. Very cool. Well, listen, I am super excited about this, and I'm going to ask you one more question, which is related to the essence of this show. So it's yours is on cyber and AI. This is Audio Signal, which is on or musing on storytellers, stories, and storytelling. So the importance of storytelling in our life, I always like to say we're all made of stories. Even when we go to the grocery store or walk in the street, we're still telling a story. Maybe just the way we look, people, the way perceive us, and we can even do it consciously or unconsciously, but we're telling stories. And then sometimes we do it consciously, which is having a podcast, writing a book, doing art to share certain emotions, certain things. So I want to know, what is your take on storytelling and how important it is for education? I'm going to connect it to what you do for cybersecurity, from sitting on the board and telling the right story to get the budget as a CISO or a CTO, to explaining maybe to the teenagers how to be a little bit more careful maybe online. So why
Absolutely.
storytelling and why you decided to have this podcast and telling story.
I think it goes back to, just curiosity, having that drive for wanting to keep people safe, but also being forever curious. I've always been someone who's tried to figure out how things work. I always have a million different questions about everything. Like, it's never ending. And like, I read textbooks for fun. So I want to be able to reach people who have questions just like me and want to learn. And how else to do that other than to talk to the people who are in those seats now and can really answer those questions, rather than sometimes, reading a book or reading an article. You get to hear from somebody who's actually in the seat and dealing with it day to day, and not just hear about, how fascinating and fun it is, but there are challenges too, and how you deal with those and push through. Because I think that's important to highlight as well. Some aspects of technology or working in the tech sector can be challenging. It's not always roses. I mean, especially, like, for example, I was in a role, and we weren't hacked, but we were dealing with a hack, and that happened over a weekend. It's, and there, we like to joke that those kinds of things happen on weekends and holidays, but the hackers choose the best times. But it's, there are so many questions that come with that. It's okay, well, how do you deal with that? Like, I mean, how do you prepare for that? And now it's, well, what tools are we using? The tools keep changing. The frameworks change. What the best guidance is changes all the time. And it's really an industry that you need to, that keeps you on your toes. And I want to be able to, ask the questions that other people have, that I have too, because I have tons of questions that I'd like to know and learn more about. So I'm hoping that, as far as my audience goes, it's a group of people that, want to keep learning, just like me.
Yeah, and to connect, the best way to learn is through sharing stories, which your guests will definitely have, and you just share a bunch of story about yourself, about your experience, and I want to reconnect again to what you said at the beginning, which is, our life, even if it would be easy, if it was just a straight line, it would also be extremely boring. So
it would be
few turns here and there, and definitely there are turns and bumps in this industry, and up and down. And, and I think by talking to these people, that they're going to share the story from their perspective, people may connect and don't leave cybersecurity as something so up in the air because it's intangible. It's like, okay, what is this cyber? Where is it? Can I touch it like I can touch other things in life? And again, analog, digital. So we're all looking together to get to the end. So to get to the end, I want to invite everybody to check your show, which is already live, to connect with you. There will be all the links that you guys need into the notes underneath, and ITSP Magazine on the host page. That's where you can find Christina and everybody else. You'll find Diana too. She's still there. She's always very welcome once in a while. She wants to come on the show, and looking forward to see her, hopefully in one of this upcoming event in the summer. So, Christina, thank you so much. And
thank you, Marco.
I'm looking forward to hearing your stories.
Thank you. Yes. And thank you again for, having me join the ITSP network. I'm very excited about it. And thank you to all of the listeners and future listeners of my show. And feel free to reach out and connect anytime.
Absolutely. So follow us, subscribe, and both of our channels so that nobody's jealous. And stay tuned for more story like this. There's a ton of stories. We'll never get bored to share stories. So thank you very much. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Insights, solutions, and networking all come together at RSA Conference. Join a global cybersecurity community at rsaconference.com/ITSPmag24.